Hi everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and today we're going to take a look at what I believe is the best value weapon in EFT, which is the Vepr Hunter. I always go on about this gun as best value for new and even intermediate players, so it's long overdue a detailed rundown, so stick around and let's get going. So let's start with the obvious and answer the question, why is the Hunter the best value weapon in the game for me? I like to think about it as a combination of two factors. First and foremost is ammunition. I end up speaking about ammo constantly because, as you've likely heard 1,000 times, it's the ammo that makes the weapon and not the other way around. This is because EFT is full of armoured players, which means that a great weapon with bad ammo will get you killed, whereas a bad weapon with good ammo at least gives you a fighting chance. Using bullets with low penetration is a surefire way to get yourself killed as a newer player and be sat on the stat screen with 17 hits and no kills on one enemy. In the case of the Hunter, because it's chambered in 7.6251 NATO, this gives it plenty of stopping power even using fairly budget rounds. We'll look at this a little bit more in detail in a bit. The second parameter is about modding and flexibility. There is a clear value in a weapon that can be made into a top tier meta weapon. A great example of this is something like the AKM versus the AKMS. Both of these weapons are extremely similar, fire the same rounds and take the same mods. However, the AKM takes one of the best stocks in the game, whereas the one for the AKMS cannot be upgraded at all. This commands a difference of usually about 20,000 on the flea market for the stock weapons. In much the same vein, the Vepr Hunter can only be upgraded slightly. This might seem like a disadvantage, but the beauty of this lack of flexibility means that it will never be a meta weapon, which keeps the price nice and low. You don't really have endgame players going out buying Hunters and spending 200,000 on them to min-max recoil and ergo like you do with M4s, HKs, AKMs and a plethora of other weapons. Between these two considerations, what we end up with is a gun that not only slaps if you use it right, but is cheap to pick up and run by nearly anyone. This combination is why I believe the Hunter to be the best value weapon in Tarkov. So you might be saying at this stage, that's all well and good and I've heard it all before, but what can we actually do with it? In terms of builds, the Hunter is pretty straightforward. Firing as semi-auto, there are only a handful of mods, some of which are added more recently. Before this, you could really do very little with it at all. Technically, the Hunter is bought from Jaeger level 2 for 47,000 rubles, but they trade on the flea down to 30k all the time given that scavs spawn with them fairly often. Let's go and look at the stock preset for a second and see what we can do with the weapon. There's only one gas tube and cover, so we don't need to worry about these at all. The base Hunter comes with a standard stock, of which the new version has been added to the game, which is the SVD style stock, coming with minus 50% recoil versus the original of 46% and 3 more ergonomics. I don't think it makes a huge difference to be perfectly honest, but given it's only about 5k, you can get it if you really want to from Jaeger level 2. Now there used to be no muzzle devices for the Hunter at all, but now there is a suppressor which can either be bought from the flea at an extortionate price, or from Skier level 3 in a trade for one Nixor lens and an AA battery. Batteries are dirt cheap at around 3,000 rubles, and with Nixor lenses at about 20k, this is about average for a general suppressor. It gives minus 2% recoil, minus 11 ergo, as well as a minus 2% accuracy debuff, which I wouldn't worry about that much. Personally, if I'm running a hard econ raid, I don't bother with the suppressor, but it's a personal choice and it depends on how sneaky you want to be. Now, magazines are the biggest problem for the Hunter for low-level players. There are two versions, a 5-rounder and a 10-rounder. Scavs pretty much always come with the 5-round mag, and clearly this is not a large number of bullets, 1 in the chamber and 5 in the mag on loading into the raid. These can be bought from Jaeger level 2, which is still a bit of a problem initially, as level 10 players are unlikely to be there yet. However, the 5-rounders are sold on the flea for 5,000 and are very unlikely to be looted. Unfortunately for the 10-rounders, you'll need Jaeger 3. These are clearly what you want, as 10 is much more workable, but it is hard to get Jaeger to that reputation early on, and the 10-rounders are too much on the flea market, in the range of 15 to 20,000. They're still unlikely to be looted though, as when found on you, they won't be found in raid and have a very low value in being sold back to the traders. In short, stick with the 5s until you can buy the 10s. Next up, scopes and optics. Now this is where the Hunter gets a lot more interesting. For those of you who are familiar with the AK platform, you'll be well aware of the wonderful option of the TTO1 for mounting smaller red dots to your weapons. Fortunately for us, the Hunter's rear sight can also be removed and replaced with the TTO1 as well, much like the other guns. I don't normally use the Hunter for close range engagements, as I'm more of a full auto kind of player. But if you do like semi-auto even in close combat, it's perfectly acceptable to use the TTO1 and red dot combo, for example something cheap like the Pillared Weaver, to engage enemies effectively in CQB. Not only can we use the TTO1, but the Hunter is equipped with a dovetail mount for the larger optics as well. This just goes to demonstrate the point perfectly that the Hunter has everything that we would like it to have and nothing more, i.e. many ways to mount scopes, red dots, runs good ammo, but not enough to make it expensive through late game use. The addition of the dovetail means that it natively supports the PSO scope, which I consider to be the default dovetail scope, so to speak, as it's available from Prapor Level 1. If you want to find out some more about the PSO itself, and specifically how the rangefinder works for estimating enemy distances, please do check out my in-depth video, which I'll link to above. If you fancy using any other scope, you can use the dovetail mount again to attach any of the standard mounts and use the Picatinny that this gives you to use the scope of your choice. There are a few choices which are all broadly similar, which is the Cobra, the two variants of the B13, the Pillad and the SVD low mount. Some of these rails sit higher on the weapon than others. Remember that in Tarkov this does actually make a difference due to height over bore, or simply put, the bullet comes out of your barrel and not the scope, and the higher the scope sits versus the barrel, the bigger the difference is between where you want to shoot and where the round will go. This effect is amplified at short ranges, in the most extreme examples meaning that you shoot a rock or a windowsill in front of the barrel when it looked clear through the scope itself. From this perspective, the SVD low mount is probably the nicest to use, and does actually come with ergonomics buffs in-game of +2, but it's only available at Mechanic 3. One interesting feature of the Axion Cobra is that not only is it available at Jaeger level 1, which means you can buy this straight after unlocking him, but it also has a rail of its own for using lasers or flashlights as well. I have run this build sometimes to add a laser on the side. This means that if you get into a sticky situation in close quarters when running a long-range build, you stand a bit more of a chance at hitting, as unless you do the TTO1 trick, which is expensive as it requires you to buy both a PSO and a red dot, it can be hard to compete close up with no iron sights either, especially when you're getting used to point shooting. With the Hunter's recoil, which is not small, I have found that point shooting is a bit chaotic and not as effective as with other guns in the game, especially as you're likely to be firing off rounds much more rapidly than normal. The cheapest setup that I have found for a hybrid long-range CQB laser build is a tie-up between two options. The first is using the Pillad Weaver scope. This is super cheap, partly because they drop on scavs on the VPO 366 hunting rifle, but also because the scope is not very nice to use, as the reticle is not very clear around the edges. This scope uses the UTG 25mm rings, but strangely, if we're using the Cobra, you can't actually attach these directly to the rail. Instead, you have to use a LaRue Tactical Picatinny riser first, which is 3k from Mechanic 2, then the rings for 1,500 from Jaeger, and then the scope, which can be 8k to 15k on the flea, which is very, very cheap. For lasers, the NC Star Blue from Skier 1 is the cheapest at 5,500 rubles. Now, we have the ability to both run a scope and a laser on the Hunter. The second option is utilising the ACOG scopes, which are the cheapest assault scopes as classified in-game by Tarkov. These have quite a tight field of view as well, which is one reason why they are quite budget, but you also need an adapter called the Compact Mount for sights, which is only 1,000 rubles from Skier 2. Once you have one of these, do a linked search on the mount and choose one of the 3 ACOG style scopes by going into assault scopes. This will depend on what is available at the time, but usually the tan version is the cheapest. This and the other black version of the TA01 NSN have a slightly different reticle to the regular ACOG 3.5, which is a small yellow crosshair, but I actually quite like it. These are normally around 12 to 18k on the flea market. One final interesting thing to note about the ACOGs is that you can actually attach an RMR base to them and then an RMR compact collimator to give you a real red dot situated above the scope. Alternatively, on the TA01 NSN version only, you can instead use a backup iron sight on top, but I think this is absolutely horrible and have never wanted to try it out in a real raid. If you're a sadist, then feel free, although it is an incredibly cheap alternative. Next up, let's talk about ammo. The lower pen rounds are either scav rounds or specialist. Ultra Nozzler, for example, is a Jaeger 4 round, but I can't imagine anyone trying to leg meta people with the Hunter. BPZ is Jaeger 2 and TPZ is Jaeger 1, which to me looks to be the wrong way round, but must mostly be to do with the damages. However, unless you're fighting someone with no or very low grade armour, you won't be killing with one shot to the thorax anymore anyway, as it's 85 HP, and there is some damage mitigation through armour even on penetrating rounds. So TPZ is okay if it's all you can get. Clearly, M80 is better if you can, and on Peacekeeper 2 it's cheap and good at around $1.66 a shot. Peacekeeper level 2 is fairly easy to get to, as you just need level 10 and $11,000 worth of sales, no reputation. The sales quantity can be quite a lot at the start of the game, but it might be worth the investment if you're going to use him a lot. M80 is the staple round for this caliber, deals good damage and dispatches level 4 armour easily, and is still very effective against level 5 armour too. For a round that is available so early on, it performs extremely well and is one of the main reasons why the Hunter is a beast for early and mid-game econ loadouts. After this, M62 and M61 are amazing but expensive, and both require high levels of Peacekeeper and lots of quest progression. M62 is unlocked at level 3 after Spa Tour Part 6, and M61 at Peacekeeper level 4 after Wet Job Part 6. The differences between these rounds is a bit nuanced, as they both deal with armour really easily. M62 is a tracer, so be careful when using it at long range as it can give your position away, which is why I prefer M61 for sniping. On the other hand, M62 does more damage and also gives you a fairly hefty recoil benefit of 5%, which when compared to M61's recoil disadvantage of 10% is a 15% swing between the two rounds. This means that M62 is more suited for close quarters fighting, where the tracer doesn't matter as much and where the reduced recoil comes into play for weapons like the SA-58 and the 7.62 MDR. If you don't have the levels, you can also make M61 in the hideout currently at workbench level 3, which you do need mechanic 3 for, with 3 red gunpowder and a helix, which at the moment comes out to roughly 1,700 rubles per shot. Even when you do get it with Peacekeeper, directly from the trader he charges $11 a round at the moment, this stuff is pricey. All in all, you can make the Hunter work on the super cheap. With the base gun at roughly 30k and 27k of mods will get you a scope and a laser to go with it. Buy a couple of mags and the best ammo that you can access up to M80 and you'll be smashing out PMCs left, right and centre in no time. I've used the Hunter extensively throughout most of this wipe until quite near to the end game, and it is a magnificent weapon for the budget conscious player. In this clip you can even see me nearly crack under the pressure and try to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in taking out Sturman for the Jaeger questline with it. So if you've enjoyed the video, please remember to sub and hit the bell if you want to see more, and it really helps out the channel too. You can also follow me on Twitter and Twitch to catch me when I'm live. Until then, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.